and welcome to the second program in the 2022 series of Consciousness Central. I'm your host, Nick Day. We've been on hiatus for a couple of years because of the pandemic, and finally we're back with a great new set of programs featuring conversations with some of the leading minds in the field of consciousness research. And in this program, we take a look at the science behind binaural beats with pioneering researcher Elizabeth KRASNOFF. We talk to Jay Sanguinetti about the latest developments in devices using transcranial ultrasound. And we talk to the head of the OSIRIS REX research team at the University of Arizona, DANTE LAURETTA, about NASA's mission to detect life on a passing asteroid. All this and more in this packed edition of Consciousness Central. Our next guest is Elizabeth KRASNOFF. Welcome to Consciousness Central, Elizabeth. Thanks for coming along today.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you
very
Nick.
much. You have your PhD from CIIS. You are with the California Institute of Human Science.
That's correct.
That actually is a new one for me, but could you tell me what that is?
So the exciting part about this institute is that they have recently received accreditation for the study of the science of consciousness. And so it's really where the field is gravitating right now for anybody that wants to do serious research, look scientifically at matters of spirit and consciousness.
That's
so
awesome.
Really
that is
pleased
awesome.
To be
very
there.
good, very good. Is that in San Francisco?
It's outside of San Diego in Encinitas.
Okay, nowhere near San Fran. Okay,
Yeah.
well, so close. Okay, brilliant. So yesterday you gave a plenary talk about binaural beats. That seemed to be the main thrust of your talk. Could you just perhaps kind of encapsulate what you said in a shortened version, just so we can get a general sense of what binaural beats are and why we want them?
The big mystery, what are binaural beats? So let's just start with the word biohack or brain hack.
Love it.
Right? It's really important right now in this moment to investigate all the ways that we have of modulating our brain waves. We're there. The science is there, the desire is there, and the people want it. If you go on YouTube right now, there are 41 million hits for binaural beats. People are using binaural beats. There's a study out right now looking at what people are using them for. 30,000 people were surveyed globally, and they were using them for relaxation, and I believe 12% of them were using them for altered states of consciousness. So the kids are saying, hey, well, what is a drug? Maybe a drug is an experiential state, and can we get there with sound, and can we get there with binaural beats? So what is it? All right, so let's take a carrier frequency, like 440 hertz. That's an A on the piano. And then you split that tone and you create a difference tone. And so let's say you put 436 hertz in the left ear. You can pan that in any software. I use Pro Tools, but you could use MATLAB. There's lots of professional softwares for that. And let's say you put 444 hertz in your right ear. You've created a difference tone of 8 hertz. Now, why do we want to do that? Okay, so that tone doesn't exist anywhere. It only exists in your head, and you can only access that tone by wearing a pair of stereo headphones. And the research is showing that you need to listen to it for a good 8 to 10 minutes for it to have an effect. Now, what effect does it have? We have this difference tone of 8 hertz. What does that even mean? 8 hertz, the example that I've given you, is theta. So there's a lot of research right now about what are the rhythms that are occurring in the brain when I am doing different activities, when I am in different states of consciousness. Wakeful, sleepful, meditating. We know that these each correlate to different brain waves or rhythms. That's in many fields. That's not just binaural beats. So what everybody is doing is saying, wow, how can we deliver those frequencies to create those brain states and control our states of consciousness? That's why I call it a biohack or a brain hack. So what the evidence is showing is that if you create this difference tone, right, we're using sound, which is a pressure wave. If we send this pressure wave of 8 hertz into our brain through stereo headphones, it seems that we are enhancing an 8 hertz brainwave in this case, which would create a meditative state. Why would you want that? Well, maybe you like sound and you would like to meditate. Well, that can be your meditative practice. So that's sort of a beginning overview.
The most effective form of a binaural beat, how to administer it, is it a tone? Is it music? Is it something pulsating or rhythmic? Where's the sweet spot with a binaural beat?
You ask all the right questions.
That's why I get the big bucks.
Have you thought of a career in interviewing?
I'm getting NBC if I pass this.
So there's some new research from, I don't know the exact pronunciation, Klimesh seems to be how I think it's pronounced, but it is in Frontiers in Neuroscience, which is a very reputable journal. And he has mathematically calculated the sweet spot of each of these frequency bands. And by frequency bands, I mean delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma. Those are bands of rhythms in our brain that signify for us that certain states or activities are occurring, okay? So he has calculated mathematically the sweet spot, the mean frequency in each of those bands. And what he says is that for delta it's 2.5, and then for theta it is 5, and then for alpha it is 10, for beta it is 20, and you'll notice that I'm doubling. And then for gamma, it's 40. So, you know, as we are in the field, we have just a few studies that are beginning to show us the way. That's the study we have right now that says, hey, everyone, this is the sweet spot. So if I were to calculate binaural beats at this point, I would say, okay, so I have been liking to use 4 and 8. By the way, so what I do when I create my formulas is, well, I've done several things. First of all, I ran a pilot study, a very sophisticated pilot study that took a lot of time and money, and we can get into that if you want. But I was liking to use 4 and 8 for my theta and alpha frequencies, and I was liking to use them as multiples of each other for harmonic resonance. Now, why did I like that? First of all, you can't hear an actual binaural beat. That only exists in your head. But you can turn the volume up and create phasing. So I would turn the volume up, listen to the phasing, intuitively respond to it, and I wanted it to be a harmonic resonance. If there were frequencies in there, I wanted them to be harmonious. And then I would do a first semi-science experiment, hook myself up to my heart math, I'm a registered heart math practitioner, and watch in the biofeedback how my nervous system was responding. So I was liking to use 4 and 8. Now I'm thinking I might like to use 5 and 10. So that's how you craft the beats under the surface. And then I also kept my binaural beats inaudible. The research that I read from Dr. Gerald Oster, this is who we all cite. Anyone in the field will refer you back to the Dr. Gerald Oster paper in 1973, published in Scientific American. He really broke the ground again for binaural beats and said, hey, this is a real thing. His study showed that you could take one of the binaural beats totally out of hearing range and the effect would remain the same. So in my pilot study, so a lot of people are saying, this is a placebo, this doesn't really exist. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to take the binaural beats totally out of auditory range. Oster suggested 3 dB, 3 decibels, which is basically a whisper for anyone outside of sound. I took them out of audible range, and I still got my results. I still, I used EEG, I could see on scalp topography, I used cardiovascular measures, I used bioenergy measurements. I got my results. My sample set was 4, so I have to be very clear, this was a pilot study. And in the world of science, all that says is, hey, there's something here that we should look at and study in more depth. But I did take everything inaudible for that specific reason. And so then, there's a lot of individual decisions that happen. You have to research, well, what are we trying to target? Are we trying to target focus, relaxation, sleep? What are the known brain waves, not in the field of binaural beats, but in the field of sleep or biofeedback or whatnot? What are the known brain waves that exist? And then how can I make my formulas to relate to those brain waves?
So if we combine, for example, let's just say in a very theoretical sense, because I'm sure nobody out there has ever tried this, but dancing, rhythmic music, psychedelics, and binaural beats, would that have an effect on you? Would you feel something good there, do you think? A good result from that?
Again, right to the sweet spot with the question. I would say you would be a very smart person.
Interesting.
Binaural beats work synergistically.
Yeah, so we could add that into that beautiful mix that already exists, and maybe some venues are doing that even. It could be.
I would like to collaborate with anyone that would like to put together any or all of those elements. Yeah. And I feel that we really want to, well, it's a hypothesis, but we really want to understand that binaural beats, first of all, binaural beats are not showing to be entrainment. Everybody is calling them entrainment, and I understand why. Because music, rhythm, absolutely entrains. And we have many studies to show that. That's not a question. Light entrains. Our whole circadian rhythm is dependent upon us entraining to the sun through our visual neural pathways. And we know that sound and rhythm also entrains. Binaural beats are doing something different. Oh. We don't know what. My hypothesis is that it is a resonance phenomena, very possibly stochastic resonance. I have read many people saying it can't possibly be that. We honestly don't know. But the point is that they work as an enhancement. And even beyond that, we want to think of all of these wonderful modalities as working synergistically. You're just supporting yourself from every spoke on the wheel. And again, we want to remain, this is not about running away. This is about becoming ultra present and ultra focused in ourselves and knowing what we need, how to deliver it, what our unique formula is, and the outcome is going to be, am I in my heart space?
Beautiful.
Am I communicating to you through my heart in a way that lifts us both up?
Wow.
Wow.
Elizabeth, that's such a beautiful place. I think we can leave it right there. I'm not sure.
Right on.
I have no more questions for you.
Right on, brother.
But I think you brought it home. Thank you so much for talking to us today. It was beautiful.
Thank you for getting
I learned
this
a lot, and I really
out.
do hope that people watching this will take some of this with them and explore for themselves.
It's really good for this
you gave your website, but just one more time, just for
www.sound-medicine.com, which is my company, and how you can find me and get some free binaural beats tracks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's Elizabeth KRASNOFF. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick.
So I'd like to welcome to Consciousness Central Professor Jay Sanguinetti. He's at the University of Arizona and a few other places. You're into quite a few things. You're the man to talk to about ultrasound and all things associated with vibrations, both in the theoretical sense and also with practical applications. Jay, tell us what's going on. We talked to you a few years ago. I'm sure a lot of things have moved on since then. Can you give us a good overview of your world?
Yes, a lot has happened since 2018, I think was the last time that we spoke. Last we spoke, we were doing non-invasive brain stimulation with ultrasound, so trying to focus a beam of sound energy into the brain to modulate the circuitry, meaning change it temporarily. And back then it was pretty crude technology. It was hard to know exactly where the beam was going, and we have to use MRI to focus it. So over the pandemic, what we did was really try to accelerate that technology, advance the technology, and really try to understand when we're trying to focus that beam of energy into the brain, are we really getting into the circuitry that we're trying to target? Is it modulating that circuitry for a short amount of time? Is it safe, is always the first question we have to ask. And the important question is, what is it like for the subjects to undergo this intervention? So we did a bunch of that work over the pandemic. We were actually one of the only labs on campus that was running human subjects during the pandemic. So it was a lot. There were a lot of protocols to run human subjects, and we had to take people's temperature a couple times during the study, and if they started coughing, we'd have to push them out of the study. And yeah, it was kind of a crazy time.
So it's very precise now. You have this way of focusing. Well, how would you call it? A column of sound or a beam of sound? What's the technical?
Call it a beam of sound.
A beam of sound. Okay, and you're specifically targeting a region of the brain. How specific is it? How fine-tuned are you?
Now, if you measure the beam in water without the skull, it's actually like your pencil, if I can see that.
Right.
So the beam is coming out of the transducer and it focuses, and the beam is about this size.
Okay.
So it's about 10 millimeters long by a couple of millimeters thick. Mm-hmm. That's in water. Now, when you try to push the ultrasound through the skull sort of changes the beam a little bit because it's trying to keep energy out, trying to keep things out of your brain. So, evolution did a good job of keeping things out of your head. So we have to try to get the beam through the skull, and that's going to change the sort of nature. It makes the beam a little bigger, it opens it up. And so we're probably several millimeters thick by several millimeters long. And that allows us to target pretty much any region in the brain, from the cortex all the way down to the thalamus and places like that.
So does this beam presumably goes right through, or does it sort of lose energy as it passes through brain tissue? Or do you have a point where it kind of focuses to a point?
There's a point where it focuses, and the transducer I have actually has multiple rings, and I can do some fancy phase mathematics, so I can phase align the beams so they target deeper or more shallow.
Oh, okay.
So I can actually change it in real time.
How do you determine what the target area of the brain is?
That's a good question. It really depends on what we're trying to test in the lab. The benefit of this is we can target pretty much anywhere in the brain. Now we have to use fMRI to try to figure out if we're actually on target. But a couple studies we were trying to modulate mood or enhance mood as a sort of treatment for depression and anxiety and things like that. So that was kind of prefrontal cortex trying to go after the emotion, mood centers in the brain. And in a bunch of studies, we actually showed that we could make people without any mental disease happier. And then we could take people with something like depression and actually make them feel a little bit better from that treatment. So, that's more of the treatment end of things.
Yeah.
But most of the work in the last 2 to 3 years has really been focused on facilitating mindfulness and meditation.
Oh, great. So, okay. So tell us about that. How do you do that
good
using
question.
sound?
Well, we have all these beautiful brain imaging studies where they take long-term meditators or people who are just learning to meditate, and they put them in the scanner. They look at the brain regions that light up or turn off when people are trying to meditate. So we have this sort of brain mapping science where we have a very general sense. That's a very young science. But we have a general idea that this midline structure in your brain called the default mode network, for example, will change its activity when you're meditating. And so we basically just took all that literature and we used that as targets for our ultrasound. And so we started putting people inside the MRI scanner. Now they can actually wear the transducer while they're inside the machine. So they're actually laying in the MRI, we're scanning their brain, we're actually ultrasounding into the default mode network while they're either at rest or they're trying to meditate. Mm-hmm. And we're basically trying to it's sort of like training wheels. We're trying to help the brain get into the more mindful state a little bit quicker while the person's trying to meditate. And those studies have been amazing. Subjects have been reporting all kinds of relatively deep mindful states.
What could possibly go wrong? Are there upsides and downsides? How careful do you have to be?
Lots of upsides and lots of downsides.
Okay, tell us about the upsides and the downsides.
You have to be super careful. The upsides are, you know, for treatment, we have a new sort of platform for treatments.
Right.
The pharmaceuticals work relatively well for some people, and they don't work for a whole lot of other people. And that's because they're not very targeted. They just change your whole brain and your body. You know, the whole gut brain gets changed by SSRIs as well. So the upside is you have an intervention that can individually target brain regions for that brain and really try to help that individual brain sort of change its patterns for the better. In mindfulness and meditation, if we can facilitate people's mindfulness training, there's all kinds of upsides for that. There's tons and tons of benefits. So, you know, we're really sort of trying to push that and make sure that the intervention is safe in those types of contexts. The downsides are a lot. So we're talking about energy in the brain, and anytime you're putting energy in the brain, you have to be careful, especially if you turn the juice up. So if you're turning the power up, you can hurt the brain pretty quickly. And so a lot of our studies, what we do is we tend to measure the energy, the acoustic energy, just to make sure that we're below about a watt per centimeter square. So you want a low wattage, low energy, you don't want to heat the brain up. Always doing that safety check first. But there's also other types of safety issues, so we don't know what would happen if you just use this every day. So if I gave you a device and I said, go use it every day and come back next year and tell me what's happening, I would not think that that would be very safe. We would know. And that's because, you know, you're putting energy into these circuitries and it's going to change that network over time. And really it depends on what you're doing with your brain after the intervention. So if you're constantly sort of changing the default mode network, for example, which is a part of the brain that helps you consolidate memories and things like that, and then you go sit in front of Facebook, and the Facebook algorithms are sort of tuning your brain. If I've made your brain more plastic with ultrasound, and now the Facebook algorithms are sort of taking advantage of that plasticity, you know, that might change your brain in a way that you're not, that's not good for you.
This is a device for world domination right there. We just got to be careful who gets hold of it.
Right.
Don't let Meta in for now.
Yes. Yeah. You want the better angels working on it.
Exactly. So, and do you have people who have been working with you, you know, your subjects for some time who have got long-term benefits? You can point to that and say, it is as a result of a treatment program, something like that? Not yet. Okay. If you want to give me $10 million in funding, I'll do those studies. If anybody has $10 million, Jay is your man, particularly if you're
would love that.
So now you've been working with ultrasound, but am I right in saying you're also working with light as well?
We have.
And how do those two things contrast and compare?
Good question. So there's a technique called photobiomodulation, which is using red or near infrared light to modulate the brain. And you know, I think about energy on a spectrum from light to mechanical. There are all different ways to impart energy into the brain to try to change its activity. So normally you do that with electricity. That's the sort of normal way to think about the brain. Obviously you can do it with chemicals. So anything from pharmaceuticals to psychedelics can obviously change brain activity. But you can do it with sound and you can do it with light as well, believe it or not. So this is a helmet that has either LEDs or lasers, and you shine red light into the brain. And I'll spare you the details, but basically what happens is the light goes into the cell and increases its capacity to make energy. So the Krebs cycle is making ATP, or energy in the cell. And it's been demonstrated all the way back to the 1980s that that red light can get into that process and just increase its efficiency. So basically just giving more energy to the cells. Wow. Well, Jay, thank you once again. And we're going to check in with you in a year or two and see where it's all going, because it's such a fascinating area. Very cutting edge. It must be fun working in such an area, actually, to so sort of be fun. There. Yeah. I am so excited to get out of bed every morning and go to the lab and work on these things. It's incredible. Brilliant. Okay. Yeah. Fabulous. Okay. Jay Sanguinetti, thank you very much.
We're looking at these heads. They've got these neural nets going on and some EEG readouts. What's going on here?
That's right, I'm here with A&T, and we have EEG systems for a variety of applications. One of our specialties is really taking the EEG system outside of the traditional lab environment into unique applications. We have a highly portable system, including the caps, the amplifiers that run on battery power for the cleanest possible signal. You can record that onto a tablet and really take the entire system outside the traditional lab setting to unique environments, such as, for instance, to the Amazon rainforest we see here for a study during ayahuasca sessions, or any number of creative, unique applications that researchers can think of.
So how would you describe the main difference between this and, I don't know, a standard EEG equipment? I mean, there's something about this, yes?
Yeah, so the main thing is the flexibility. So we have a modular system with a variety of different caps for different applications. We have traditional silver chloride electrodes that you use conductive gel. We have dry electrodes that don't require any gel at all, which can be very convenient for quickly putting on the cap and getting your recording started. And then in the middle ground, we also have saline nets where you soak the net in a saline solution, and then you can put it on very quickly while maintaining a high degree of comfort and high signal quality. And then in terms of our amplifiers, you can stack them to kind of double the number of channels. You can run hyperscanning in parallel with two subjects side by side who may be interacting or within the same or undergoing some sort of similar experience together. And then we also have a variety of software for signal acquisition and review and export, as well as offline analysis for event-related potentials, time frequency analysis, and source localization.
Okay, so this is an incredible bit of equipment. And so how, if somebody wanted to, I don't know, use, rent, buy, what do they do?
So most of our customers are working in a university lab or a hospital where they're using funding mechanisms like NIH grants or startup fundings from the university. We don't have really any offerings for the consumer home user, but it's really more for high-end data for publication and research and clinical applications. So they can get in touch with us at A&T. Depending on where in the world, we have a network of different distributors, and we can provide a quote tailored to your application. So we'll work with you to determine exactly what you're planning to do with the equipment and provide you with the best possible arrangement of devices to best apply to your application.
Okay, excellent. And what was your name again? I'm sorry.
My name is Will Cuthbert.
Will, okay, Will, thank you very much for talking to us this evening, and good luck with it. Okay,
My pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to welcome to Consciousness Central Dante Lauretta. Dante is a Regent Professor at the University of Arizona, the Lunar and Planetary Laboratory, which is an amazing even concept to contemplate. He is the Principal Investigator of the OSIRIS REX or REX mission.
Just like the dinosaur.
Yes, which is, and the purpose of which was to go to greet a passing asteroid and return with material from that asteroid, which I think is in, perhaps you'd like to tell us about that, because it's a very exciting thing and kind of an unusual project as well.
Yeah, I like your term, greet the asteroid.
Yes,
that's a good way to put it. So,
yeah.
The OSIRIS REX mission is a NASA mission, and the objective is to return material from the surface of a near-Earth asteroid to the Earth for analysis in our laboratories. Our target asteroid is called Bennu. Bennu is the mythological heron from Egyptian mythology. It was born from the heart of Osiris, so we really like to play with that theme in our program, because Osiris was the bringer of life, as well as the god of the underworld and the god of death. And asteroids have that same kind of dual nature. You know, we're really interested in Bennu because from our ground-based telescopes, it looked like it had a lot of carbon, maybe a lot of water, and it's an ancient body. It dates back to the very beginning of our solar system. So it's like a geologic remnant of the kind of material that may have led to Earth as a habitable world and maybe even sparked the origin of life here. But of course, since it's a near-Earth asteroid, it means it has an orbit that comes very close to our planet on a regular basis. It may, in fact, someday collide with the planet, causing a widespread natural disaster. So we have this dual interest in our origins as well as in security of our homeworld. And we launched in 2016. It took us about 2 years to arrive at the asteroid. We spent all of 2019 mapping the asteroid at amazing resolution, down to 5 centimeters across the entire surface of the body, selected a single location, went down, scooped up a bucket full of material, and we're now in interplanetary space on the way back home. The samples will be back in 2023.
There are a number of hypotheses about the origins of life. Could you kind of give an outline of what they are?
Yeah, the traditional approach to the origin of life is very molecular based, right? We kind of look at the basic molecules that are operating in our body. We have DNA and RNA, these nucleic acids that contain our genetic information. DNA is like the library. It has all of the recipes to make the proteins in your body. And RNA is transcribed, and it takes that recipe out where it's built into a protein. So we look at what are those molecules made out of. There's some simple chemical compounds. When you look at them, the chemistry doesn't look that challenging. But what I really get interested in is the information. Somehow it's not just chemistry, it's information contained inside those molecules. And here at the Science of Consciousness conference, that term has cropped up over and over again, information playing a central role. And several people have said this, and it's something that a conclusion that I came to. It's a fundamental part of the universe. You have matter, you have energy, and you have information. And it's when those three start to cooperate that you get life, and maybe that's when you get consciousness as well.
Yeah, exactly. And of course it does sort of raise the question, what is the ontology of information? Where is it? Where does it exist?
Right.
Because you don't sort of have a bowl of information. Oh, here we are. You know, we can sort of measure, shall we say, energy, and we can, you know, but it's hard to sort of measure information in the same way. Whatever information DNA contains, we see what it does, but we're not quite sure what it is. I mean, unless you have a thought on that.
Well, there are some fundamental science that was done on that. It goes all the way back to Claude Shannon in 1948, where he developed information theory, and he came up with the fundamental unit of information, which is the bit. Mm-hmm. And of course we can measure bits in our technology, right? Our computers are full of information. We carry them around in our pockets all the time now. So from that sense, from an information technology perspective, we have a very good sense of it. What I'm trying to do is bring that into the origin of life question and see how does it apply to these biomolecules. And I think once you have it, you can measure it. The question is, where did it come from, right?
Yes, yeah, well, in a sense, yes. It sort of arises from perhaps something embedded in fine-scale structure of the universe, this kind of thinking, which is a little hard to contemplate for our minds, or mine at least. But there it is. You know, you're now into the realm of, to some degree, philosophy and the Platonic realm, and then you're into Bohmian physics and this kind of thing, the quantum field. Which brings us to, I note that you and Stuart have been in conversation about adapting ORCO-R or recognizing ORCO-R as a possible pathway to not only to consciousness but to life itself. So can you talk about what you and Stuart have been talking about?
Yeah, so you know, I mentioned earlier that the traditional approach is the molecular approach. If we could just figure out the chemistry, then the mystery will be solved. And my gut tells me that's not right. That we're missing something. And so I started a survey of the literature. Who has been thinking about the origin of life from a different perspective? And I came across Stuart's paper, The Quantum Origin of Life. And it just lit me up. I mean, there was so much exciting ideas in there. It was my first introduction to the ORCO-R theory, so I went back to the Penrose and Hameroff papers to learn more about what they're talking about. I have a background in physics, and so some of it made sense to me. I at least understood the nomenclature and the lingo. And it is also something, I think, like a lot of us, we've always wanted to know about the nature of consciousness and our minds and where it comes from and how it interacts with the material world. But I never thought about connecting it to the science that I was doing through the origin of life until I read Stuart's paper. And what really got me interested was he takes it to a molecular level. And he has very specific predictions about the kinds of molecules that are essential for his quantum wave function, the superposition that needs to get set up, that might lead to this collapse and the objective reduction and then the arisal of consciousness. And at that moment I was like, I think we're studying the same thing. I think the origin of life and the origin of consciousness they might be exactly the same thing, and that's the motivation. I always thought, what's the motivation? Why would molecules want to organize and start this elegant dance that they do and have been doing for billions of years on this planet? And he gave us that motivation, and he gave us a way to test it, which is exactly what I'm looking for, because I'm bringing material back from an asteroid. I've got a team of chemical analysts all around the world, and they're saying, what do we need to analyze for? What are the key molecules that we're looking for? And he called out the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. I won't get into too much details of the chemistry, but they're molecules that form rings, rings of carbon, rings of nitrogen, and I was like, we can measure those. And so I was like, great, there's a hypothesis and it's testable. That's exactly what I want to know. I don't know if he's right or not, but he gave us a test, and that's how science moves forward.
Excellent, excellent, yes. I would assume that you're also familiar to some degree with Anirban Bandyopadhyay's work in
Yes.
Japan, and he's describing interconnected beat frequencies from the quantum scale to the cosmic scale, which connects in a very intriguing way everything to some degree, and it feels quite novel what he's doing. Have you had a chance to look at his stuff?
I have, yeah, and those frequencies are really interesting, especially because it starts to connect to the astronomical world, right? And we could start to look for specific observations, and Stuart and I have had conversations. Traditionally, I'm not an astronomical observer. I don't work with telescopes. I'm very much a lab person. I'm in the lab doing chemical analyses, and I got involved in this asteroid mission because I wanted that stuff in my lab. But I think it's really intriguing, and if we can start to get some traction and show that these basic ideas that Stuart's developing, I think there's room for this to expand into observational astronomy.
Yes, fantastic. So do you have like a kind of a time frame for what happens when OSIRIS REX returns, and when we might sort of sit down again and say, well, Dante, tell us about what we've learned?
Absolutely. Once you get into rocket science, you start to work at millisecond precision. So
Right.
and I've carried that into the sample analysis program. We have 2 years after the samples are back on Earth for our sample analysis campaign as funded within the initial mission budget. And so right now we're going through very detailed planning organizations. I have the mass that is going to be allocated to the team for their investigations, and I've got a giant spreadsheet of which lab get how many grams and what are they going to do, and what are the data products that they're going to expect to return. And we have what we call early mission science, some of the quick things that you can do almost immediately when the sample's on the ground, and then some of the more sophisticated analyses that are going to take maybe months to the year time frame. So I expect we'll have the very first results by the end of 2023, kind of a basic understanding of the nature of the sample. The organic chemistry, we'll have the quick workup on that. We'll know if these molecules that Stuart has indicated are present in the sample or not. And by the end of 2025, we'll have completed the plan as we've laid it out. And right now, we've got over 100 publications in that plan. So there's going to be a flood of scientific literature describing what we learned from this asteroid.
Wow, this is very exciting. I envy you for your job to some degree. I'm not sure I clearly couldn't do it, but still, just to be at the cusp of something so, could be, world-changing at some level.
Yeah, it's a mission in the New Frontiers program at NASA, so that's exactly the idea, right? That we're pushing boundaries, that we're exploring new frontiers, and I think we're going to deliver on that promise.
Excellent. Okay, well, Dante, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for talking to us this morning. That's a great place to land.
Absolutely.
And what can we say but wish you well and happy landings. And we're really looking forward to hearing what happens next. And hopefully we'll reconvene at a future conference and find out.
Yeah, and I hope your audience is watching September 24th, 2023, about 8:30 in the morning Mountain Time. That capsule will be on the ground, and we'll understand what we got from this asteroid.
Great, excellent. That is exciting. They will be. I guarantee it. They will now. All right. Okay. Thank you, Dante, so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
mallets brings out a different coloration and sound. Each of them are unique in its relationship to the instrument. And then there's a mallet that is not here, which is my own chi. I was able to, through years of study, focus the chi to the point where I can manipulate the sound. Well, the receptor is a big part of it, obviously. I can demonstrate a little bit if you like.
Please.
So if I maintain the fundamental, for instance. And then by just projecting my chi from a source, I can then introduce sacred geometry, spin the sound off in one direction. Bring it up. So anyway, different techniques.
You are beautiful.
Thank you.
So it's time once again to catch up on what's been going on at the plenaries, and I am here with Stuart Hameroff, who's going to tell us all about it. Stuart, what's going on this year?
Well, today was 420, and the day was all about altered states in the plenary sessions. The morning session were 3 talks on altered states. The first one was on shamanic drumming and shamanic states, which may or may not include psychedelics. It depends on rhythmic drumming and chanting and that sort of thing. And Emma Yules of the University of Michigan, from George Mashure's group, did a study on shamans that she recruited and found all different cultures and types, and did fMRI and EEG and looked at various methods and looked at their EEG, and there were a lot of similarities with altered states from other mechanisms. And she also looked at novices, non-shamans, and had them do drumming, and they didn't get quite the same effect. So there's something to it, to being a shaman for a long time anyway. So that was very interesting and something different. And then we had Charlotte Marshall from the University of Liège in Belgium, who was talking about near-death experiences, and she reviewed the literature and what we know about near-death experiences, and reviewed some of the proposed mechanisms and theories, and some things we know about it. And she was asked about the end-of-life brain activity that we've heard at this conference before, where when the heart stops and the blood pressure goes away, that there's, and the EEG happens to be on, there's a burst of activity that looks like gamma synchrony EEG, which some people have suggested is the NCC of the near-death experience. And if a patient dies, well, there's no telling about it. That's just maybe something like the soul leaving the body. Critics say it's an artifact of spasmodic neuronal gas, but why would it be so coherent? And so that was interesting, and that's becoming more scientifically grounded, near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences and so forth. And then the third speaker in the morning session was Elizabeth KRASNOFF, who has a treatment center in New York on using sound. And she's talked mostly about binaural beats, where you put tones in various ways, stimulating the brain or the ear or sound, and slightly mismatched frequencies, so you get interference effect and get beats. And this is actually how maybe the EEG in the brain works, with interference patterns and connecting high frequencies, medium frequencies, and low frequencies all the way down to the EEG. So it was a way of using something like physiology to treat the brain. So that was very interesting also, and also something totally different. And then we had the keynote speaker of the day, who was Robin Carhart Harris, who spoke here 10 years ago when he was at Imperial College in London. And that talk was very memorable because he spoke about subjects in a MRI scanner who were given psilocybin, the active ingredient in psilocybin mushrooms, intravenously, so immediate effect, and they lay still with their eyes closed in an MRI scanner or an EEG, and reported later their experience, which they reported as psychedelic experience, vivid hallucinations and peak experience and so forth. And the MRI, which the researchers expected to kind of light up like a pinball machine, actually looked cold and dark, as if they were almost brain dead. And similarly, EEG was also flat, and relatively flat. And there's still no good explanation. Carhart-Harris thinks it has something to do with entropy. It could have something to do with consciousness going to a deeper level, the quantum level, which doesn't require energy. But anyway, this time he spoke about, in more general, he's now the head of the director of psychedelic research at UCSF. So he's come over to the States, lives in the Bay Area now, and he gave a really wonderful overview of psychedelic research in terms of how it's come out of the closet or out of the background into medicine, used therapeutically. And we're talking about psilocybin mushrooms, ketamine for chronic pain, MDMA, DMT, et cetera, et cetera. All of these have been tried for depression and for other things. And so it's, but he also had a kind of a warning, a pushback. He said these are not a panacea. They're not for everybody. There are side effects. People do have bad trips. And if people are depressed, some of them, no matter what you do, are going to have a bad outcome. So it was a little bit sobering. This is not, it's going to fix everything in one fell swoop. And he also talked about mechanisms, about the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor, which is where psychedelics seem to bind, at least some of them. Others bind to the NMD receptors. Some of them, and they may actually go into the cell and bind to the cytoskeleton, although that's debatable. But so he gave a nice overview of what we know about pharmacology and of the psychedelics, and a number of studies and new areas that for treatment. For example, bulimia. He talked about a bulimia study that they're doing with psychedelics and others. So this is a big wave in medicine now, and even at our hospital here at the University of Arizona, we're doing depression studies with mushrooms and MDMA and ketamine for chronic pain and things like that. So although with a little bit of a warning from not only Robin but from others, this is becoming part of mainstream medicine, or will soon. So that was it was great to see him. It's great to see his success story. He's now got quite a great position at UCSF, and I think we'll be hearing a lot more from him and his team in the future. And finally, the afternoon session was the mechanisms of psychedelics, how they actually may work in the brain. And the first speaker was George Mashur, who was the co-sponsor and co-sponsor and co-organizer of the conference and the conference co-chair, who is also an anesthesiologist, as I am at the University of Michigan. He has the Center for Consciousness Science. And he talked about, he talked about anesthetics on one hand and then psychedelics on the other. And there's overlap in a couple of anesthetics, which at low doses are psychedelic and at high doses are anesthetic. For example, ketamine. Low-dose ketamine is hallucinogen, dissociative, although nobody's really defined that well. Something like near-death and out-of-body experiences. At higher doses, it's an anesthetic. And he talked about the mechanism of that, presumably NMDA receptors. And then another drug that has biphasic effects was nitrous oxide, laughing gas, which has been used since the 1800s as a party drug, along with diethyl ether frolics. So ether and nitrous oxide are anesthetic gases, which at moderate to high doses are anesthetics, but at low doses are euphorics and were used for socializing and so forth. And so we talked about the mechanism of that and how it might relate to the what we know about anesthetics and the Meyer-Overton correlation. So very illuminating, very, very interesting talk looking at these biphasic effects of the anesthetics. So the second speaker there was Alex Kwan from Yale, talking about plasticity. So restructuring the neuron, the synapse, the synaptic plasticity. And he mentioned that psychedelics tended to have long-term effects on synaptic plasticity and neurons, and he showed beautiful images of dendritic spines, showing the increase in dendritic spines, actually imaging these in an animal as the animal is receiving psychedelics over days, and showing the growth of new spines. And this is associated with learning. And the growth and the spines continued after the drugs were terminated. So that was very interesting and somewhat hopeful in terms of long-term effects from short-term treatment. And the last speaker was Katrine Preller from the University of Zurich, from Vollenweider's group, who's put out a lot of work over the years. And she gave a general overview of the effects and electrophysiology of psychedelics and what's known about their mechanism, and gave a very nice talk. So that was a day, and then of course there were the concurrent sessions had another whole room of psychedelics. It's been a prominent theme here, and posters too, I imagine. And so here we are. It was a great day.
Awesome. That's a great review of today's a really big day. I think you've opened up the psychedelic field here, given it plenty of space for a number of years now, and it really seems to be a kind of a golden age coming on. Would you say that's true?
Well, not only us, but we've tried to incorporate it in part of our whole program. Of course, MAPS and USOMA and other organizations are pushing research of psychedelics, and we'll also have a talk Thursday by Paulo Roberto Silva de Souza, who's a Brazilian shaman and a psychologist, who is head of the Church of Saint Dom in Brazil on ayahuasca, and he'll be giving a talk about that. Also for medicinal and spiritual effects. So yes, it's been a prevalent theme here.
Excellent. Okay. Well, Stu, let's check in with you as soon as we can to catch up on more of what's been going on at the plenaries. But for now, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Nick.
And that brings us to the close of our second program of Consciousness Central 2022. I hope you've enjoyed it. Be sure to join us for the 2 remaining programs where we'll be looking at the neuroscience of spiritual experience, also known as neurospirituality, the search for the neural correlates of shamanic altered states, and a potentially major breakthrough in quantum gravity computing and its implications for consciousness research. And finally, a scientific method for global consciousness transformation through AI-assisted meditation. Until then, this is Nick Day saying bye for now.